There, now you can go ahead and you want to share your screen, and that would be great. So, my name is Kathy Dion. I'm the executive director, and I'm here to introduce to you Lisa Morgan, who happens to be an author and an advocate and a consultant in crisis supports. So we're going to let her run through a presentation today. We're going to be utilizing the question and answer box, which is at the bottom under the Q&A, and we will respond to those at the end of the presentation. So just put them in there, and then we will go ahead and respond at the end. Lisa, is there something else, or are you good with that?
Yep, that's great.
Okay.
That's great.
And if those of you who can join us next month, August the 16th from 12 to 1, we're going to be doing a presentation around back to school and 504 plans. So join us next month and sign up for that. Other than that, Lisa, I'll let you introduce your books and everything you want about yourself, and I'll let you take it away, okay?
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. I'm going to be talking about crisis supports and suicide prevention for the autism community. So because I'm talking about suicide and suicide prevention and crisis supports, if anybody is feeling like they need some help, I like to put these numbers up just in case you need to take a break, you need to use these numbers, that's fine. And I'll just continue on. So autism and suicide, what do we know? There was a study done by Cassidy et al. In 2014 that showed there were about 364 participants. They were newly diagnosed autistic adults. 60% of those in the study had reported suicidal ideation compared to 17% in the general population. That's a huge gap. And then in the same study, 35% of the autistic people had planned or attempted suicide compared to just 2.5 in the general population. And then with children and adolescents, there's a little bit, less studies on them, but we did find that there is a definite problem with suicidal ideation and behavior reported in autistic children, even under 10 years old. So it's really across the lifespan. So autistic individuals are significantly more likely to think about, attempt, and die by suicide than the general population. And another difficulty we have is that people do not, clinicians and professionals, they don't always recognize that suicide is even a problem for autistic people. And most of the research is done with autistic people without intellectual disabilities. There's few research with autistic people with intellectual disabilities. So we need more research. We need more research on, a lot of this, but we're getting more and more all the time. Suicide is a leading cause of premature death in autistic people. So studies have shown us that we have unique risk factors. So we have all the risk factors of the general population, as well as unique risk factors for autistic people. The first one is co-occurring psychiatric conditions. There was a study done in Denmark. It was a 20-year study. They looked at millions of people, and out of the autistic people in the study, they found that the ones who had experienced suicidal ideation or had died by suicide had co-occurring psychiatric conditions, with most of them being anxiety and depression. Lack of social support and unmet needs have been researched and found to be unique risk factors. With social support, really what it is it's asking for help being a social skill, which makes it difficult for autistic people to reach out for help. Autistic people may not understand who to reach out to. They may not understand what to ask when they do reach out. And if they do, sometimes it's a negative experience due to misunderstandings, maybe the way they said it, maybe the way the other person heard it and got, excited or had a sort of an outburst of reaction to it because they were scared for their friend or relative or something. So that is a unique risk factor, is just being able to socially reach out and ask for help. The unmet needs is really number of unmet needs, and autistic people are unsupported for mental health challenges, even physical health. Having something available is not necessarily mean for autistic people that it's actually helpful. So they may have a mental health clinic in their community. They may have access to physical health care, but it may not be helpful to them due to misunderstandings and, communication difficulties and knowing what to say. And just, there's so many different social aspects of asking for help. Employment, a lot of autistic people can do the job, but can't get through the very heavily and very vague interview process. Housing is can be a difficulty for autistic people, as well as education. Personally, I'm a life coach, and I have had so many college age autistic people who are suicidal because of their experience in college, and not just on the social scene, but with professors and understanding assignments and just so much about college life that's difficult for them. So relationships can be difficult always, for autistic people with that social communication challenges. So that's why these are unique risk factors. We also have camouflaging or masking. So masking is a strategy to fit in with peers, colleagues, friends, family by masking their autism. They try and look and act like everyone else, so that it is a good thing in that way. So somebody masking can get a job, have a relationship, be able to be accepted in a group of, a friend group or something, but it also has a cost. It's exhausting because what you're doing is you're suppressing all the sensory stimulation that's coming at you in the environment. You're putting on a face that maybe everyone else has, but feels uncomfortable for you. You're trying to keep up with conversation. You're trying to stand like everybody else. There's so much that you're doing. It's exhausting. Can't keep it up for very long, which is why children, teens, adults, have to kind of regulate and withdraw, or maybe they have a meltdown, after school, social events or work. So they need that because it's so exhausting to be out there masking. They also can lack a sense of self if they've been doing it for a very, very long time, which most autistic people have. There's a lack of support as an autistic person because you're masking as a non-autistic person, so you don't get the support that you can understand. And then not being known for who you are because you're masking. And so when you go home, you may have been with people all day, but not as who you are as inherently as an autistic person. You've been acting like a non-autistic person. So nobody really knows you for who you are, which is profoundly lonely, and thwarted belonging is another unique risk factor. But again, it does help people socialize, so people keep using it. So it does hinder relationships because it can cause difficulty if you make a friend while you're masking and then you get close and you become more, know more about each other. And then the masking sort of comes off and you show a little bit of your autism, or you have trouble with some sensory and stuff in your environment, and you let your new friend know, and then it just kind of falls apart. So many autistic people, have told me, and I've experienced it myself, that friendships just disappear. They stop calling, they stop texting, it ends. And the sad part about that is we can't learn why. So it keeps happening over and over again. Which all of this leads to profound loneliness and not belonging. A late diagnosis of autism for all of the reasons listed above is a risk factor, as well as female. It's difficult to get diagnosed if you're a female. A lot of autistic females are diagnosed later in life, so they have had even misdiagnoses that they're trying to change, which is very difficult once you've been diagnosed with something, to change it. They've been through a lot of traumatic social experiences, and it's just again, everything above happens. Autistic burnout is also very supported through research, unique risk factor of suicide for autistic adults. And autistic burnout is an intense physical, mental, or emotional just exhaustion. It's accompanied by a loss of skills, so it's harder to get out of autism burnout because you don't have as many of coping skills to use, because they regress. Comes from living in a world not made for us. Autistic adults who are able to live independently are mostly affected. It varies from person to person as far as length of time and intensity. It can be a result from camouflaging and masking. A lot of autistic adults with autism burnout have more difficulty managing their emotions than usual, which, autistic people can have trouble managing their emotions without having autism burnout. So it just kind of exacerbates that. Prone to outbursts of sadness, anger, anxiety, depression, increased sensitivity to change, which is kind of going along with the regression of skills. Change is harder, can lead to suicidal thoughts and behaviors. Not a lot of people know about autistic burnout. So I like to show this paper. It's a very good paper if anyone wants to learn more about it. So we do have some autism specific resources out there. They're on my website, which is on the last slide, free downloadable to be able to be used if you support an autistic person in crisis, or if you are an autistic person and you just want to know about them. The Autism Crisis Toolkit was the first one. The purpose on that one was to identify autistic callers or texters who went to crisis lines for help. It was to help the crisis workers to be able to effectively communicate with autistic callers and texters, and to know how to support them in crisis. It explains the unique characteristics of autism. It suggests practical ways to support an autistic person in crisis. And then there's a one-page bulleted summary to use in real time for the crisis center workers. It went out to over 200 crisis centers, and I've heard now that it's also being used by professionals, even friends and family who are trying to support an autistic loved one. And it's been translated into Dutch and Portuguese Brazil as well. So it's really being used for more than it had first started out with, which is really very good. So about identifying and communicating, the resource shows that, sensory difficulties can both identify, and you might be talking to an autistic person, because it can have a powerful impact. It's unique to each person. In fact, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person, which is what my friend, Dr. Stephen Shore, once said, and it's quoted often. May cause a regression of skills, and it has to do with the environment. So if you can remove the person from the environment or somehow change the environment, it would be supportive. An autistic person may show difficulty identifying or verbalizing emotions, which is also an identifying factor for the crisis center workers. If an autistic person states they don't know how they're feeling, especially if they're a teenager, when they kind of say that anyway, like, I don't know. It could be a true statement because of the difficulty in understanding emotions. In fact, alexithymia, which 50% of autistic people do have, research has shown recently. And alexithymia is the inability to understand or identify one's emotions. It can be just very difficult. So they may, the resource suggests helping them to explain emotions in a different way, and also giving them time. So explaining them in a different way might look like they say, I feel like I did when I had a birthday party and nobody came, or I feel like I did when, my professor graded my paper really hard. they might be angry. So they may tell it in a different way. They may draw, it's just to encourage the person to try to get out how they're feeling in any way that they can. Also, identifying factor is that literal thinking and understanding. An autistic person can be very literal in how they think and perceive the world. So a phone call or a text can make it difficult to ascertain whether to trust the person on the other side, which an autistic person is going to have to do in order to get that help. And words are a way to build trust. So if the crisis center worker says, "I'm here with you," and the autistic person is alone in a room and, they're texting or calling on the phone, that's not going to build trust for the autistic person because you're not with them, you're on the phone. So just understanding that they think very literally and saying something like, "I'm going to stay on the phone with you until you're feeling better," or, however that might be, just something literal and honest is the better way to communicate with an autistic person. So just talking about a lot of misunderstandings and miscommunications can be an identifying factor because of social interactions, and it could go across multiple circumstances, multiple relationships at once. Someone may have a disagreement with their husband, an altercation, or, some kind of parenting conflict with their child, and then go to the store and be misunderstood at the store, or somebody looks at you differently, or doesn't talk to you, but talks to the person next to you, which happens to me a lot, feel invisible. I mean, it can happen so much in one day, in one morning. So that's enough to possibly put somebody into a crisis. So relationships are also identifying factor when somebody calls in or texts in. The relationships are difficult. Failed friendships, other relationships are common. Like I was saying before, they kind of disappear and you don't know why. Showing confusion in making, developing, and keeping a relationship going is also helpful to possibly identify that you're talking to someone who's autistic. And this resource was made because there are some people who don't know they're autistic yet. There are some people who don't disclose their autism for various personal reasons. So this is to help the crisis center workers if they don't disclose or they don't understand they're autistic yet. Feeling disconnected and isolated from society. Autistic people, a lot of us feel like we don't belong because we're different. We don't feel like, we belong to the society that we live in, which produces profound loneliness. The environment is hard to be in a lot of times. Relationships are confusing. Language is culturally different. And it happens in so many different times and places where you don't understand social nuance, or somebody says something and you take it literally, and then all of a sudden, they think you're being rude. I mean, just so many different ways. Language can be different for autistic people. Perseveration is the rumination of thoughts, both positive and negative. In a crisis, an autistic person may perseverate on negative thoughts and have a lot of difficulty switching to more positive thoughts, which may keep them in that crisis. So it could be if the crisis center workers don't understand, or whoever's supporting an autistic person doesn't understand that they're perseverating or understand perseveration, it could be perceived that they're not listening, or they're refusing to cooperate, or it's being done on purpose. But it's really, really difficult to get out of perseverating on a negative experience once you've started perseverating on it. And one thing that is suggested in the resource is to find, if you don't know it, to find their special passion. If you know what their special passion is, you can try to talk to them about that. That might be enough to bring them out of that perseverative loop of whatever negative thing happened to them. Processing speed. Autistic people have varying processing speeds that are unrelated to intelligence, and this can happen throughout the day, that their processing speeds vary. It's negatively correlated to anxiety. So the higher the anxiety, typically the slower the processing speed. Autistic people just may take longer to respond. And so really taking the time to investigate if an autistic person is done with the call or text, even if they haven't talked for a while, is supportive, just to make sure that they still need support. So communication, to be supportive would be no social nuances, done purposefully, concisely, honest to even to where you're feeling bluntly honest, and very literally, because autistic people just typically think very literally. And we may be able to, understand if we're not in a crisis, but in a crisis, it's a lot harder. So one example I like to use is when somebody says you're in a pickle, which is a tricky situation. For an autistic person, it would most likely look like this, very literal, and they'll be wondering what you're talking about. Another thing is playing with fire. An autistic person may see it like this. And so especially in a crisis, it's very important to talk with a literal language, and also to listen with a literal ear, because they most likely will be talking very literally. So this is tricky too in supporting autistic people, is they have a very different inner experience than they present on the outside. That's a lot to do with masking. But if you assess an autistic person based on their presentation, you may miss their crisis. Assessing them by their mode of communication. So if they say, as calm as I look right now, that I'm going to kill myself, that has to be taken just as seriously as if I was crying and, couldn't sit still and was very, visually upset. It has to be taken just as seriously with autistic people, because everything can be happening on the inside. So whether they're verbal, whether they write it down, whether they have a card they use or an assistive device, it has to be, what their words have to have more weight than their presentation or how they look or act. Listening to what they're telling you, even if it goes against what you're seeing, is really important when supporting autistic people in crisis. So there's sensory issues as well that can be both identifying features and things that need to be supported. They may withdraw, which is a coping technique. They may melt down, which is external. They may shut down, which is internal. They may have high anxiety. They may dissociate, may have sensory overload, and they may be perfectly presenting as fine. What I've experienced since I started this, because I had a traumatic experience with finding that my husband had died by suicide, and the time after he, had died by suicide, I had some crises of my own. And as I got more and more into a crisis situation, I would look more and more fine and calm. So for me, being visually upset, I wasn't as in a crisis as I was when I got perfectly calm and maybe not even been able to verbalize anymore what I needed, but just looked fine and calm. So really the presentation has to take second place to what they're telling you is how they're feeling, even if they can. So it can get very tricky at times. So ways to support them, I'm going to go through each one of these. Be clear and direct, use few words as possible, getting straight to the point, and always presume competence. Even if somebody can't, verbalize through words and they are using another way to tell you things, that's presume competence. And this is basically it in a nutshell: being clear and direct, using few words as possible, and getting straight to the point is really important when someone's in a crisis. There's so much going on in our heads that, that's really clear is kind. Allowing extra time to process thoughts and formulate words is supportive. If there's a way to ask if they're still there, like if you're on the crisis line, and respecting their needs to process, because an autistic person can't make that happen any faster. And one night I did call the crisis line, text the crisis line, because I felt completely and totally alone in the world, and they did hang up on me. So it didn't work out too well for me that night. Helping to shift those thoughts. So shifting negative thoughts to positive thoughts can be due to difficulty in perseverating. And talking about those special interests is going to be this part of the solution. So again, language to avoid is any kind of figurative language. And as well, listening with that literal ear is going to be just as important, because they're going to be most likely speaking literally and bluntly, honestly, and if they're able to speak at all, maybe they're doing pictures, but not expecting words between the lines or any kind of social nuance to come out of them either is important. Positive coping skills, sometimes you refer to as distraction strategies. A lot of crisis center workers will use these. People supporting autistic people in real life use these, but I was told by some autistic people that they were misunderstood as minimizing their pain, being meaningless, and being dismissive if they weren't explained. So explaining why you're suggesting to somebody to watch TV or go for a walk, listen to music, move the big muscles, engage in their special interests or passions. Explaining why is going to be really supportive for them. If you have to facilitate a safety plan, it helps to make needed connections to people and resources. And again, this is asking for help as a social skill. They may have never done this before. They may need to know what to say, who to talk to. If it's in their community, they may need to know how to get there. They may need to practice as well, because, they've never done it before. It can be difficult even for an autistic person who is successful in other areas. And so, really making it successful, giving them the numbers, helping them in any way that they need to facilitate that safety plan, and also make it successful so they can use it. So for support, a lot of autistic people don't have any support, that are independent, live alone, and don't have family, don't have friends. Maybe they have some online friends, but getting them connected is going to be important. So they may be connected, they may be not connected at all. They may need to reconnect. They may need access to care, and it needs to be the right care for people who understand how to work with autistic people. Suggesting any kind of social support is going to be important. So for short term, trying to make at least one source of support, but also, trying to, a crisis center person wouldn't do this, but if you're working with them in real life, building a support system would be important and very supportive. This next resource is Considerations of Warning Signs of Suicide. And it's because the warning signs of suicide for the general population have a lot of aspects of autism. So the purpose was to understand the need for considerations, to recognize the differences, and then to support autistic people as autistic people. So it states the general warning signs of the general public, shows needs for considerations, and then gives supports. So these are the warning signs of suicide for the general public, taken off the American Association of Suicidology's website. And I'm going to go through just a few of them today, but the resource goes through every single one of them. And I always like to just stop for a minute and, make sure that no one makes any important life-altering decisions based on the information in the following slides. All warning signs to the general public pertain to autistic people too, just with considerations for autism. The information here is to broaden existing knowledge about autistic people. And to remember that autistic people know the most about themselves, and the job of professionals helping is to make space for them to communicate. So again, asking a question that's too general or vague may be very difficult, especially if somebody's in a crisis. There are way too many answers to think about and process, and an autistic person may not get the help that they need. So some examples are, how are you? Or how can I help? Is even, it can, an autistic person can think, what do I need help with? And it go from the crisis they're in to help at work, to help at home, to, it just can all of a sudden come in your mind, and you don't know which one to pick. It's too vague. It's too big. What do you need can also be too big. So better is, why did you call or text? That may seem blunt, but for an autistic person, it's exactly what somebody needs. What do you want to talk about? Is exact, like that's very literal and right to the point. So that's supportive. So the first one I'm going to talk about is no reason for living, no sense of purpose in life. So an autistic person may feel this way due to social isolation, and a professional may make, and they could take comments like, I don't belong to this world, or I've never fit into this world, as them saying a suicidal statement. But it might just be the reality of an autistic person not belonging to this world culturally, socially, environmentally, and they don't belong and they don't fit, and they never felt like they have fit. So the consideration to take here is, are they just stating a truth? Because we don't want to take an autistic person who's being autistic and, treat them like they're suicidal. And we don't want to take a suicidal autistic person and just treat them like they're being autistic. We want to find out what exactly is going on for them. And so investigating, using all the communication skills in that first resource that I talked about, and finding out what exactly is going on for them is most supportive. Anxiety, agitation, sleep issues. These symptoms are difficulties autistic people can struggle with regularly. How might one know if they are signs of suicide or if they're just being autistic? Using that concise, specific language during the assessment or crisis call or text, and investigating any changes in level of anxiety, agitation, or sleep issues is going to be what is going to be most important. Withdrawal is a coping mechanism. It's self-care for autistic people, and it can also be a warning sign for suicide. So determining any changes in level or type of withdrawal, again, is going to be really important in supporting them and finding out if they're truly suicidal or if they're just using withdrawal as self-care. This one may be the most true one for autistic people. Autistic people can have strong emotional connections with objects. Many are connected to their pets, some who serve as therapy pets. So this behavior does warrant further investigation. And then remember the person that you're helping. Autistic people may have other reasons for giving away prized possessions, but there is something that happened to me in real life that kind of goes along with this. It was about a 10 or 11-year-old boy who had this little blue car. He went everywhere with this little blue car. You never saw them separate. They were always together. And one day he came up to me, he was cradling it in both hands, he had tears in his eyes. And he said he wanted me to keep this for him because he felt he loved it too much. So that I would be concerned for that boy if I suddenly saw him without it and it was missing, but that would be one thing. But because he wanted me to take care of it, that didn't concern me that he was feeling suicidal or anything like that. So, really knowing the situation, finding out what's going on is supportive. This resource is warnings, actual proposed warning signs of suicide for autistic people. This is the international team that developed it over a period of little over a year. These are the warning signs of suicide for autistic people. They're based on, changes from baseline, sudden or increased withdrawal, no words to communicate acute distress, a current traumatic event, marked increase in rate or severity of self-harm, worsening of anxiety or depression, a new focus on death-related topics that are not a special interest, because some autistic people do have suicide as a special interest or passion, perceptive suicidal thoughts and ruminations, seeking means or making plans for suicide or suicidal rehearsal, statements about no reason for living or no sense of purpose in life, and then hopelessness is the same. The only one that's the same as the warning signs for the general public. So this resource comes with scenarios for every single one of the warning signs. Sometimes there's 2 scenarios. So the person who's using the resource can see what it looks like, how this might, how the warning sign might play out for an autistic person. So this is an example of a scenario for sudden or increased withdrawal. And Lucia is withdrawing. And so she usually withdraws after schoolwork or social events, but her family notices that not only is she spending more time in her room, but she's coming out, she's not as regulated. She doesn't want to participate in her special passion, which is making clay animals. She does continue to do her usual activities, and just takes longer to regulate afterwards. So there's a change in regulation, and there's a change in the length of withdrawing, and there's a change in her interest in her special passion. So this scenario, what we were hoping to show is a few things. One is that longer withdrawal and having harder time regulating, along with a reduced interest in her special passion, has been shown by research to be a warning sign of suicide for autistic people. Another thing this scenario shows, which a lot of people do not understand, is that autistic people will continue on with their schedule. And for professionals and people who support autistic people, they might say, well, is she still doing her activities? And the mom might say yes, or Lucia might say yes. And then they think, well, she's okay, she's still doing her usual activities. But no, that does not mean that, because for autistic people, routines are very, very important. And it may be harder for her to stop doing her usual activities than it is to just stay in bed. Because, a lot of times it's, oh, she can't even do her usual activities, she must be really depressed or something. But for autistic people, it's a little different. So just because she can do her usual activities doesn't mean she's okay at all. It doesn't mean that at all. But it could, because everybody's different. But having that in your mind, that may not mean what I think it means, is going to be very, very important in supporting Lucia. So the last resource I want to share with you is a new one. It's building a list of reasons for living. The Autism and Suicide Prevention Work Group together developed this suicide prevention resource to be used by autistic people. It can also be used by family and friends to help the autistic person. But having a list of reasons for living, it shows here why it's important, how to create it, when to use it, and then some ideas for how to use it. Having that list can be very important when somebody's in a crisis, just to sit and read it. It's also very important, due to masking, to put down as a reason for living, who they are as a person, as far as a career, or, if somebody has a special interest in reading, they're a reader. If they have a special interest in animals, they might be a dog whisperer or something. If you can put it down as who they are as a person, that can be very helpful, because of that masking and not developing that sense of self. Reading who they are if they're in a difficult, spot. I am a daughter, I am a mother, I am a reader, I am a gardener. And then some of their special passions, and there's it just talks about how to do it. It had, I've used one. It was very helpful for me, and it's been very helpful for other people. So it's just an idea. It's a resource out there that can be used. So the main points to take away is to be able to watch for changes from baseline as far as withdrawing, regulating, anxiety, self-harm, or depression. Any of those, if you know the person and those baselines are off, it's concerning. Autistic people in crisis may not behave like non-autistic people in crisis, but they still may be in crisis. That's very important. They may not be able to verbalize emotions or what they're experiencing. So help them to find another way to do that through drawing or telling a story that's sort of like it. A new focus on death-related topics. Really discerning between whether it's a special passion or suicidal thoughts and behaviors is going to be important, as well as if somebody does have this as a special passion, just kind of checking in with them and making sure it doesn't become suicidal thoughts and behaviors. Understanding that they may, research has shown that autistic people research ways to die by suicide. So, understanding that and looking out for that if you're concerned about somebody. And understanding that what may be traumatic for an autistic person could be different from what causes trauma in non-autistic people. So many autistic people have said, they've told what they're in crisis about and have been told, well, that's not bad. That's not very traumatic. Why can't you just, do it or whatever? But it's different for us. An environment can be so overwhelming. It can put somebody in crisis, especially if there's been other things that have led up to, have happened that day to lead up to the environment being kind of the last straw. So listening and listening and just believing them. A lot of autistic people talk about not being believed when they try to share what they're in crisis about or what they're struggling with. So believing them, even if you don't understand it, if you're not autistic, you really don't know. So really believing what they're telling you. And that one about if they come up to you, there's no preceding traumatic event, they're perfectly calm, and they say they're making plans to kill themselves, that is very concerning. It doesn't matter whether they're showing any emotions or not. So in conclusion, we all have, a role to play in suicidal prevention efforts. Learning directly from the lived experience of autistic people is very, very important. Don't be afraid to ask about suicidal thoughts. They're not going to put the idea in their head. That's been researched. And then listen to the answer. A lot of times if somebody's thinking about, having thoughts of suicide and thinking about killing themselves, they are kind of relieved when somebody opens up that communication and that conversation for them, because they don't know how to do it. Remember that autistic distress may not look like neurotypical distress. Make use of these resources. They're all on my website. And then advocate for more autism-specific training for crisis center workers, emergency department clinicians, and other mental health professionals. And it is time for questions if we have any.
Hi, Lisa. So a number of people want to know if the PowerPoints are going to be available for them, because there was some resources in there that they didn't catch and to write down. Is that possible?
Yep, I can give it to you.
Okay. And then I can go ahead and send it out to the list of who I have. And then I did have one question that came through. I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer this one, but let me go ahead and ask. So are there peer supports for autistic adults with mental health diagnosis? I was going to, and I'm not sure what MAE is, a referral to an international peer support specialist, but I'm not sure.
I know that there are places that have peer support specialists, but I don't know of any in Maine.
I think you're right. There's a lot of them that are doing something, but they're going to be, you have to do them online, and they're not going to be from our state. But a lot of people in the chat, they were really asking just about your PowerPoint. And I had a question that I just wanted to ask too, because I think sometimes as a parent, I am a parent of a 29-year-old, when we see signs, or we think we see signs, you know, we've gone through what you just did, and we're like going, wow, I wonder, you know, should we address it with the individual, or should we address it with a professional who's knowledgeable in this? I guess, where should we start that, with them or with a professional?
Well, I would probably do both. You know, I would probably ask, if I was concerned about somebody, I would ask them, do you have thoughts of killing yourself or harming yourself in any way? It's hard to do that the first time. I have to admit, you know, it's really hard to do that the first time, but I'm kind of used to it now, because I do help a lot of people who are thinking along those lines, and just, it gets easier after a while. And like I said, a lot of times they're relieved to have somebody ask them that. They're relieved to be able to start talking about it. And it's so important, if you're a parent, if you're a support person, to react in a very calm way. How can I help you? Can you tell me more about that? If you react in a way that's going to kind of scare them, like, or try to talk them out of it, like, how can you feel that way? You have this and you have this, and I've helped you so, you know, none of that's going to help. Just remember that, you know, it's brave for them to say, yes, I'm having these thoughts, but it's not their fault. So, you know, helping them is the most important point at, you know, part of this at that point. So just what do you need? What do we need to keep you safe? You know, I've had people, you know, put medicine away, have somebody take it and just give them a day's, you know, worth at a time, or a week, you know, and make sure that if they have, you know, a collection of knives, it's safe somewhere else, you know, and just help them. And bringing a professional in that they trust and understand is, you know, just more help. So I think that would be good.
You know, it was very encouraging when you said, just because you mention suicide, it doesn't mean it's going to put the idea in their head. Because I do think sometimes we're like, oh my word, I don't want to go down that path. It's going to make them start thinking about that. So that was really good to hear that.
Yeah, so there's a research study that backs that up.
Yeah, well, that's good too. Does anybody have any other questions that they might want to ask? I'm looking to see here. Let me see. Okay, here's another one. So IDDD and ASD.
Whoops, got out of
Whoops. Did I zone out again?
Sorry, no, that's me.
Okay.
Can you ask it again?
Yeah, I'm gonna start. ID and DD and ASD. So all those. Case manager and suicide loss survivor. That's a son of 18 with autism. I love for my team to take this training. Would it be available again, or is there a place to watch it online? Great training. I know we're going to have it recorded and on our website, but I think, Lisa, this is a golden opportunity for you to say you're happy to go in and have a team and do a training for somebody, right?
Yeah, that's what I do professionally. That's my business, is I give trainings to staff. I give trainings to schools and crisis center workers. And that's what I do for my business. So if you want to get in touch with me, you know, we can work out a training, and I tailor it to whoever's audience, whoever the participants are going to be, I tailor it to them. So yeah, if you want to get in touch with me, that's what I do for my business.
Yeah, so I think it's great to have this information. The more people, especially professionals that work with autistic adults, know some of these things, you know, the better it's going to be for the adult, because they're going to be knowledgeable. So let me see if there's any others. Right now, I'm not seeing, does anybody else have a question that we didn't answer? It looks like we answered everything, especially with the PowerPoint. We've got that. We're going to go ahead and take care of that. I don't think I see any others. Do you want to have Is there anything else you wanted to add, Lisa, or you've shared your website on the last slide. So once they get them, they'll have how to connect with you.
Yeah, there's a way to contact me through my website. All the resources are on there as free downloadable resources. But you know, it's always good to have that training, because you know, I can give examples and you know, lived experience and things like that. So let me see, what else would I say? That warning signs of the proposed warning signs of suicide for autistic people, they have a lot of scenarios that are really good to read, and you may find your own scenario within that resource. So that's a good one. But other than that, if there's no questions, I think I'm out of steam as well.
Well, thank you, Lisa, for joining us, and it was very informative, and I hope everybody here also felt the same. The recording will be up and on our website. It takes us a couple of days to get it done and get it up and loaded. But yes, feel free to let people know. We usually send out notifications that something's up on the website through our Facebook page. So if you're not signed up under the Society's Facebook, just go ahead and like us and you'll get that notification when it's up and ready for your viewing. Thank you, Lisa, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me today. It was a pleasure to be here.
And I think you can
Stop share.